makes my heart sing. And when I'm feeling low, she comes as no surprise. Cold-blooded, what more can I say?
James is accused of assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated mayhem, torture, and forcible oral copulation.
What was the shocking secret Rick James kept until his death? How did this scandalous truth stay hidden for so long? Was it connected to his wild lifestyle or his struggles with fame? Fans knew him as a music legend, but did they know the whole story?
Use and abuse them.
What impact did this secret have on his life and career? Let's explore the truth behind Rick James and his untold secret. Rick was born James Ambrose Johnson Jr. He grew up in Buffalo, New York, and hated the idea of being sent to fight in the Vietnam War. So at just 15 years old, he lied his way into the Naval Reserve. But even that didn't last long. Rick didn't like being told what to do. He skipped out on the reserves and spent his time playing drums with jazz bands and experimenting with drugs.
And I was determined when I saw her, I was going to get the stuff. Rick James always gets the stuff.
By 1964, the military placed Rick on active duty. But instead of following orders, he told the draft board to kiss his ashy black A and ran away to Toronto, Canada. In Toronto, Rick's life changed. He met famous musicians like Joni Mitchell and Neil Young. Together, they formed a band called the Mina Birds. The group even got signed to Motown Records. At Motown, Rick met Stevie Wonder, who was impressed by his talent. When Stevie asked for his name, Rick gave a fake one, Ricky James Matthews. Stevie suggested he shorten it to Rick James, and the rest is history.
So we had a beautiful night out. We went to the Champs-Élysées.
Sadly, Rick's time with the Mina Birds didn't last. Since he was still on the run from the Navy, Rick eventually got caught and served time in a military prison. But that didn't stop him. After his release, Rick James went on to become one of the biggest names in funk music. Rick's wild side didn't stop with music. Fans of Chappelle's show remember the hilarious skits about his crazy adventures.
Come here, darkness.
One of the stories even involved Mike Tyson and Alfonso Ribeiro, the actor who played Carlton on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. According to Tyson's memoir, Rick showed up at a hotel one night, slapped Tyson's hand in greeting, then turned to Ribeiro and asked, "Aren't you an actor?" Before anyone could react, Rick hit Ribeiro and took his beer. Even Tyson, known as one of the toughest men in the world, was shocked. James joined the Navy when he was just 14 or 15, lying about his age to avoid being drafted into the Vietnam War. By this time, he had already gotten into trouble with drugs and stealing, so his hope was that the Navy could straighten him out. But things didn't go as planned. He didn't show up for his regular reserve session on the USS Enterprise, which led to him being sent to Vietnam. In Vietnam, he saw the destruction of the war, and it shook him. He couldn't take it anymore and decided to leave the United States. He traveled to Canada and ended up in Toronto. But his time there started on a rough note. He was beaten up badly. Fortunately, 3 men, including Levon Helm, came to his rescue. They saved his life and invited him to watch their band perform. This experience inspired James to start thinking seriously about becoming a musician. Eventually, Rick moved to Los Angeles, where he joined the counterculture movement. He hung out with the biggest names in rock, and Jim Morrison even gave him his first acid trip. James was on his way to becoming a major figure in the music world, but his wild, unpredictable journey had only just begun. When it came to his career, Rick was all about collaborating with the greats. And let's be real, working with icons doesn't come without a little drama, but somehow that just made the music better. Take Stevie Wonder. Rick looked up to him like crazy. Stevie didn't just influence him, he gave him advice that stuck. Don't play by the rules, create your own. Rick ran with that idea, building his own sound with layered beats and futuristic touches that totally set him apart. You can thank Stevie for helping Rick's tracks stand out like they did. And let's not forget Tina Marie. She wasn't just another duet partner, she was his creative soulmate. Rick found her at Motown, saw her potential, and the rest is history. Their duet, Fire and Desire, absolute legend status. Behind the scenes, they pushed each other hard. Rick challenged her to go bigger and bolder, while Tina fired back with ideas that kept him on his toes. That spark between them, it showed every time they shared a stage or dropped a track together. Pure magic.
Finally today, pop singer Rick James is being accused of all kinds of terrible things, and authorities are taking it very seriously.
Demanding $50 million in damages, a New Yorker claims in court that Rick James her at a group home in 1979, 2 years before the release of the late singer's career-defining track, Super Freak. Represented by attorneys with the Manhattan firm Otto and Babat, James's anonymous accuser describes her alleged attack in an affidavit attached to a summons with notice filed. The woman says she was 15 years old in 1979, living in a group home as part of the Youth Detention Center program. James was allegedly acquainted with the house parents at the residence, and one day that spring was brought through the dining room where all of the young female residents of the home were just finishing dinner. Though she says the other girls at the home were excited to meet James, the lady says she had never heard of him and made a quick exit to her room after finding Rick to be very suggestive and inappropriate. While she was lying face down on her bed reading, the lady went on to explain that James came into my bedroom and swiftly laid on top of me. I tried to fight him off, but he told me to shut up and quit moving or I'll cut you. James then allegedly ripped off the girl's underwear, RD her, and threatened her afterward not to tell anybody. The woman claims the incident left lasting pain in her life. I abused alcohol briefly as a young teenager, used drugs, suffered from low self-esteem, had serious thoughts of suicide, and had difficulty concentrating, all from Rick James's adding that she also suffers from panic attacks, nightmares, and flashbacks. This traumatic experience has caused me everlasting damage, and I would like to preserve my privacy in this matter. Did you know Rick had a crazy start to his career in Los Angeles?
And I'm talking about albums that sold millions of copies. Every album we did, we never failed to have an ounce or two sitting right there on the console.
Really?
A big bag of Quaaludes, okay? Cristal champagne and Jack Black bourbon, and all at our beck and command right there.
On one of his first nights there, he was sleeping on musician Stephen Still's couch. When he woke up, he saw a man sitting on the floor, bleeding from his wrists. Scared, Rick quickly got help. Later, he found out that the man was Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors. Morrison and James crossed paths again after The Doors opened for Buffalo Springfield. Morrison even tricked Rick into trying acid. What a wild way to meet someone. At the time, Rick was working with Greg Reeves in California. Rick introduced Greg to Neil Young, but it was Greg, not Rick, who ended up joining the famous band Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. Rick didn't let that stop him, though. He started forming his own rock band, Salt and Pepper. One shocking moment in Rick's life came in 1969. His hairstylist friend, Jay Sebring, invited him to a party at actress Sharon Tate's house. But Rick was too hungover to go. The next morning, he read the terrible news. Jay and everyone at the party had been murdered by the Manson family. In 1970, Rick kept chasing his music dreams. He worked with a band called Heaven and Earth, which later became Great White Cane. They released an album in 1972. Rick didn't stop there. He created another band, Hot Lips, and even worked with the Toronto blues band McKenna Mendelssohn Mainline. During this time, Rick co-wrote a song called You Make the Magic, which was later recorded by the Chambers Brothers. In 1973, Rick officially became a solo artist. He signed with A&M Records and released a song called My Mama. It became a hit in European clubs. A few years later, he returned to Buffalo and formed the Stone City Band. In 1977, Rick and his band signed with Motown and recorded their first album. Rick became one of the most famous funk musicians of all time. His journey to fame wasn't easy, but it was full of hits, unique sounds, and unforgettable moments. Let's take a closer look at how he made his mark in music history. In April 1978, Rick released his first solo album, Come Get It. This album introduced the world to James and his backup group, the Stone City Band. It included the hit song You and I, which became a #1 R&B hit, and Mary Jane on another fan favorite. The album sold over 1 million copies, turning Rick into a star. It also gave a big boost to Motown Records, which was struggling at the time. Rick didn't stop there. In early 1979, he dropped his second album, Bustin' Out of L7. Like the first one, it was a big success. It made it to the top 20 on the Billboard 200 and hit number 2 on the R&B album charts. Later that year, he released his third album, Fire It Up. At the same time, Rick went on his first big tour, the Fire It Up Tour. He even invited rising stars like Prince and Tina Marie to perform as his opening acts. In 1980, Rick tried something different with his album Garden of Love. This one was more focused on love songs, but it didn't do as well. It only reached number 83 on the Billboard 200. But Rick didn't let that slow him down.
You kept me warm on tropic nights. You kept me smiling.
In 1981, Rick released his biggest album ever, Street Songs. This album mixed different styles like rock, funk, and new wave. It included hits like Ghetto Life, Fire and Desire, a duet with Tina Marie, and the iconic Super Freak.
Use and abuse them.
The album was a massive success, selling over 4 million copies worldwide. Super Freak became one of his most famous songs, peaking at number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100.
When it was released, it turned into a monster and became a bigger monster once MC Hammer got a hold to it.
Following Street Songs, Rick released more gold-certified albums, including Throwin' Down in 1982 and Cold Blooded in 1983. During this time, Rick also helped other artists become successful. He created groups like the Mary Jane Girls, who had hits like All Night Long and In My House. He also worked with legends like The Temptations, Smokey Robinson, and even Eddie Murphy. Rick James wasn't just about music. He appeared on TV, including an episode of The A-Team, and continued making music throughout the 1980s. His 1988 album Wonderful included the hit song Lucy's Rap.
Rick always had an interest in music.
He was always banging on glasses with spoons and stuff. He couldn't stop moving. He was always trying to express what was inside it.
One's teenage years are often filled with rebellious moments we look back on and regret. Usually it involves cursing at our parents, playing music too loud, staying out late, and just generally being a bit embarrassing. For James, things were a little bit more heated. Though his mother worked as a dancer for Katherine Dunham, she also worked as a numbers runner to make ends meet. It did give a young James the chance to see acts like John Coltrane, Etta James, and Miles Davis. But it also introduced him to the underbelly of society more quickly than most. It wasn't the only thing James experienced at a young age. In his autobiography, Glow, the singer also claimed that he lost his virginity at age 9 or 10 to a local girl of 14. He suggests in the book that his kinky nature came in early. Sex would go on to be a permanent fixture in the themes of James's songs and would supercharge his releases like a few artists could match. However, before he would spread out on his own, he would end up performing alongside Neil Young and the Minor Birds. Rick's drug abuse began in his teens, first with marijuana and heroin. He began using coke in the late 1960s. Although James claimed that he quit coke when he entered prison, his autopsy showed there was a small amount of the drug in his bloodstream at the time of his death. His drug use led to major health problems. In April 1984, he was hospitalized after being found unconscious at his house by a friend. In 1998, James suffered a stroke after a blood vessel ruptured in his neck during a concert at Mile High Stadium in Denver. Earlier that year, he had hip replacement surgery to repair bone damage from jumping around on stage and substance abuse.
I don't think I've ever made an album other than for the last few years that didn't have cocaine, and I was snorting it. And we'd stay up for weeks making these albums, and we were doing like 3 or 4 albums a year.
By the 1990s, Rick's drug abuse was public knowledge. He was heavily addicted to coke and later admitted to spending about $7,000 per week on drugs for 5 years straight. On August 2nd, 1991, James and his girlfriend Tanya Hijazi were arrested on charges of holding 24-year-old Frances Alley hostage for up to 6 days, tying her up, forcing her to perform SU acts, and burning her legs and abdomen with the hot end of a crack coke pipe during a week-long coke binge. James faced a maximum sentence of life in prison if convicted on all charges, which included assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated mayhem, torture, forcible oral copulation, false imprisonment, and kidnapping. On November 3, 1992, while out on bail for that incident, James, under the influence of coke, assaulted music executive Mary Sauger at the St. James Club and Hotel in West Hollywood. Sauger said she met James in Hijazi for a business meeting, but that the two then kidnapped and beat her over a 20-hour period. James was found guilty of both offenses, but was cleared of a torture charge that could have put him in prison for the rest of his life. While serving his 5-year sentence at Folsom Prison, Rick lost a civil suit to Sauger, who was awarded nearly $2 million in damages in 1994. James was ordered to pay her about $1 million. The hotel and a private security firm were found liable for nearly $750,000 in damages due to negligence. James was released from prison on August 21, 1996, after serving more than 2 years.
Everybody know I'm not no punk. You know, number one, I mean, the whole bottom line is I had a blanket of love in prison because I'm real. I mean, if I had walked in prison with some kind of uppity attitude, if I had walked in prison thinking that I was this or I was that, which I have never thought.
In 1998, Rick was accused of sexually assaulting a 26-year-old woman, but the charges were later dropped. In 2020, his estate was sued for $50 million by a woman who accused him of raping her when she was 15 years old at a group home for troubled youths in Buffalo, New York in 1979. The suit was later dismissed. Rick once famously quipped, "Coke is a hell of a drug," and boy, did he know what he was talking about. But let me tell you, it's not just hell, it's a raging inferno. Back in 1980, Richard Pryor, the comedy legend, accidentally set himself on fire while messing around with coke. Yeah, you heard that right. Then, fast forward to 1990, and Rick James himself went up in flames in a wild crack mishap. And guess what? It all went down right after an MC Hammer concert. But that's not all. One night, Rick thought it would be a grand idea to try smoking crack rocks. I mean, who wouldn't want to light up a rock, right? Well, things didn't exactly go as planned. According to his dealer, Race Newman, Rick ended up setting a plate on fire while trying to torch some crack pipe leftovers. Can you imagine the scene? Rick, with his robe ablaze, casually strolling around like it's just another day in paradise. Newman had to leap into action, using a bedspread to put out the flames. And get this, Rick, still smoldering, acted like it was no big deal and just carried on like nothing happened.
Don't have to be rich to be my girl. You don't have to be cool.
You'd think Rick James and Prince would have been good friends. Both were huge stars in the late 1970s, bringing funk music to the world. They even toured together in 1980 on the Fire It Up tour. But these two weren't friends at all. In fact, they had a serious feud that lasted for years. Rick James didn't like Prince from the start. In his book, Glow, James said that Prince copied his moves during their tour, which people later called the Battle of Funk. James also didn't think much of Prince's music. Prince didn't like James either. He even refused to sign an autograph for James's mother at an after-party in 1982. This caused a big blow-up between the two.
And the winner is Street Songs, Rick James.
I would just like to thank, first of all, the creator who brought me here, and my mother who's sitting over there, who I give this award to.
The feud got personal at the American Music Awards after show in 1982. Rick's mom, a big Prince fan, asked Prince for an autograph. Prince ignored her and walked away. When James found out, he was furious. He went to confront Prince and was ready to fight. According to James, Prince's manager stepped in and made Prince apologize. Still, James admitted he was disappointed. He wrote in Glow, "I really wanted to kick his ass." But the drama didn't stop there. That same night, Prince met Rick James's ex-girlfriend, Denise Matthews. Prince not only started dating her, but he also made her his musical protege under the name Vanity. This move really upset James. After that, he called Prince a little B every chance he got, according to the book Prince FAQ. Even though both men were music legends, their rivalry was intense. It wasn't just about music, it got personal. From stolen moves to stolen girlfriends, their feud became one of the most famous in music history. While the two never came to blows, Their dislike for each other never went away. Now let's talk about his love life.
One day there was an article that came out. One of the things was, who's your favorite, who's your favorite musician? It was like, oh yeah, Rick James.
That's what you said.
Huge.
Right.
Everybody loved Rick James. And the next thing I know, I get a phone call. And so that's how the friendship.
James dated Linda Blair, the actress, for a couple of years in the 80s. They met because Linda called him S in an interview, which caught his attention. They hung out together at the Chateau Marmont in Hollywood for a bit, but things got complicated when Linda got pregnant. She decided to have an abortion without talking to James about it first. He felt really hurt and sad about it. He even wrote a song called Cold-Blooded about how Linda made him feel.
Cold-blooded, what more can I say?
Later on, James met Tanya Hijazi at a party when she was just 17. They started dating in 1990 and had a kid named Tasman in 1993. But there were some rough patches too. Both James and Tanya ended up in jail for getting into fights with other people. Despite all that, they got married in 1996. But their marriage didn't last long, and they split up in 2002.
He was just an amazing person, funny. A lot of comedians were around him. A lot of people don't realize how funny Rick was, and he was an amazing talent.
James also had a special connection with Tina Marie, a singer he worked with. They even got engaged for a short while. They made music together for years, and their songs were loved by many. When James passed away, Tina Marie was heartbroken and struggled with addiction. James was found dead in his home in Los Angeles. He lived in a place called the Oakwood Toluca Hills. The place was just outside Burbank. James was 56 years old when he passed away. His caretaker found him, and it turned out he had died because his lungs and heart stopped working. It was all because of his health problems like diabetes, a stroke, a pacemaker, and a heart attack. But wait, there's more to the story. When they looked into his blood after he died, they found something surprising. James had different drugs in his system, like Xanax and Coke. But even though he had these drugs in him, the doctors said they weren't enough to K him. After James died, his fans got a chance to say goodbye. They had a big event for him where people could come and see him one last time. Then they had a special funeral for him in Buffalo, New York. Lots of people showed up to say goodbye to James. They even had a free concert to remember him. In the end, they buried his ashes in a cemetery in Buffalo.